read a lot of thriller books this year, as I always do, and one of my favorite things to do at the end of the year is to look back at all the thrillers I read, tier rank them, see which ones were my favorite, which ones have I already forgotten about, what were my least favorite. It's just a fun way to reflect on the year. This is, I believe, my second time doing this because I did it last year as well, so I'll link that down below if you want to see that too, and you can see a lot of thriller books that I've read and tier ranked over the years. But today we'll be looking at all of the thriller books I read in 2022 and seeing which ones come out on top. Let's get into it. Okay, so I don't really feel a need to explain the tier levels to you because it's pretty straightforward. You'll figure it out as we go along, and we're not really going in any particular order. We're just gonna go as these pop up on the screen. So first up we have Ace of Spades, which is a YA thriller slash horror type of book that came out a couple years ago that I finally got around to this year. And I feel like for me, this one ended up being fun times. Not necessarily an all-time favorite, but I did have a lot of fun with it when I read it. It was very fast paced, and I do feel like it lived up to all the positive things people said about it, but it wasn't a personal favorite for me. Next we have An Honest Lie by Taryn Fisher, which was a DNF. I did not finish this one because I didn't like it. I was not interested in it. Next we have Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris, which is, I feel like I want to say an all-time favorite because I just recently read this one. But is it an actual all-time favorite, or is it just a 5-star that was a 5-star in the moment, but it's not the best thing I've ever read in my life? I don't know. I feel like if someone asked me for thriller book recommendations, especially someone new to the genre who hasn't really read many thrillers, I would definitely recommend this one. But I don't know. I don't feel good calling it an all-time favorite, so we're just gonna call it fun times for now. Next we have Daisy Darker, which I did not love as much as a lot of people did. I do remember it, so I'm not gonna put it in I read this question mark because I definitely remember this book. So it's either like a not for me type of story or fun times. I had a good enough time with it. I just didn't think it was amazing, and I had these expectations for it, these standards in my mind that I thought I was going to love it because I read and enjoyed Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney so much last year that I thought I would have another 5-star from her, and I didn't, but it wasn't that bad, so I'm gonna call it fun times. Next we have Good Rich People, and I feel like I have to call this one of my all-time favorites. I didn't claim that when I first read this book, and I do have some criticisms of it. I don't think it's the best thriller book ever written, but it is so unique in my mind and such a standout for me when I think about thrillers I've read. The characters are so insufferable, and it's so fun. So I do feel like that one stands out for me. Hide by Kirsten White. This one I'm also going to say is fun times. A lot of people did not like that one, but I personally had fun with it. It's an amusement park thriller where all of these people end up going to this contest where they have to play hide and seek in an amusement park, and they can win a lot of money, and things go wrong and dark, and it's kind of funny too. I feel like if this was made into a movie, it would be horror comedy very clearly throughout the whole thing. I don't think it was very clear in the beginning how comedic it was going to be in a way by the end of it. So I do think it would have been better to lead with that and to make it a little bit more clear for people so they knew what they were getting into, but I had a good time with that one. How Lucky. This one is going to go in I read this question mark. That is a book that I remember the setup of. It's following this man who I remember he is in a wheelchair. I don't remember exactly what conditions that he has, and so he kind of just stays at his house. He doesn't really go out and do much on his own. He also can't speak. So he has some kind of computer program that helps him communicate with others, and he sees this girl get into this car, and then that girl ends up going missing, and so he kind of is involved in the investigation in a way, but not super actively involved. It's like that's not the main thing the story is about, even though it is. It's kind of weird and confusing. I don't really remember what ended up happening in it. I just remember liking the first half a lot better than the second half. Next we have I'll Be You by Janelle Brown, which is definitely fun times. This is another cult thriller. A lot of cult thrillers came out this year, but this one I did like. I just really liked Janelle Brown's writing and her characters. This one follows sisterly relationships, which I thought was done well as well, but it's not an all-time standout for me. Next we have Insomnia by Sarah Pinborough, which I didn't say a lot of great things about when I read it, but after reading it and thinking back on it, I do think it's a really cool thriller. I do think it stands out in the genre. And I do think Sarah Pinborough is a very interesting author with what she's doing, but I can't call it an all-time favorite because I think I gave it like a 3-star when I read it. I definitely didn't gush over it, but it was getting a ton of hype when I picked it up. And so I kind of picked it up in the moment when it was the most popular. And then I thought, okay, this is like good, but it wasn't like mind-blowingly amazing to me. So I think I'm gonna have to put it in fun times, but I do recommend that one. I do think it is a good one. Next we have Lock-In by John Scalzi. And this one was fun times for sure when I read it, but also I kind of can't remember a lot of details about it, so I'm gonna have to put it in I read this question mark. I remember the setup and the story. It's set in this dystopian, interesting world where there is this lock-in disease that has taken over the world, and people can like rent bodies to live in other people's bodies, and then a crime gets committed, and so you don't know who actually committed the crime, and you're following a detective. But I don't remember fully how things panned out with that one. I do have a dedicated vlog to this one though, because I read this for a video where me and Elizabeth from Reading Riley did a surprise book swap where we picked a book out for each other, and this was the book she surprised me with. So I do have a vlog you could reference if you are interested in hearing my full thoughts on that one. Magpie, see, I kind of don't remember it, but I remember it making me mad. I did not like what the plot twist did, and I remember the reason I didn't like what it did, but I can't really remember a lot of the story. But by the end of it, I was like, no, this one was not for me. I do not like what this story did, so that's gonna have to live there. It was upsetting because I was really interested in the story and the setup of everything that happened. I just didn't like what the twist did with the story, so I do think I would check out more from Elizabeth Day in the future because the overall setup of it was interesting. It has to do with this woman who's struggling to get pregnant, and then there's another woman who I think comes and lives with them and gets involved in the couple, so it's like a domestic thriller with different kinds of things going on there. I don't remember all the details, but I did not like what that story ended up doing. 9 Lives by Peter Swanson, immediately, nope, not for me. Did not like this one, as well as many other people did not this year. Interesting concept, interesting setup, really boring execution, and really weird explanation in the end of how things pan out. It's like the worst motive for a killer I've ever read in a book. It was not good. Next up is Perfect Days by Rafael Montez, and I think I would call this an all-time favorite. I don't think I gave it 5 stars when I read it, but I do think that is a really solid, short, fast-paced, stalker obsession type thriller. It was really fun. I would definitely read more from that author, and that is going to belong in that category because that's what feels right in this moment. Reckless Girls, I also really enjoyed this one, but I would just call it fun times. It's just a popcorn thriller, fun to read in the summer. A lot of people didn't love it, but I had fun with it. I think if you just don't take it too seriously, and if you know it's going to be slower paced in the fact that it's a lot of build up and you're learning a lot of history and trying to understand who characters are instead of things actually immediately happening. But in my mind, it read fast paced because I was so intrigued that I was reading it really quickly. So it kind of depends on what you prefer there, but I really had fun with that one. And then Runtime is also one that I had a lot of fun with. This one is super meta. It's a story within a story within a story within a story. It's got really interesting atmosphere to it because you're following this actress who is working on this horror film in this isolated forest area. She's like the only woman on set. It's really creepy, and then it gets kind of confusing, but it's also just really fun and unique, and I had a good time with it. Secluded Cabin Sleeps 6. This one's kind of tricky because I just read it, so I do remember it, but I don't think it's going to be super memorable for me long term. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it in I read this because if you ask me in about a month, I probably won't remember much about it. I just happened to read it like 2 weeks ago, so I still remember it, but it was fine. It just wasn't super memorable for me. Next we have Stay Awake, which was a DNF for me. I didn't like it, and then I heard the spoilers, and I'm glad that I DNF'd it because it was just really disappointing. I thought it was going to be a lot more fun than it was, and it was not super fun. Still Missing, this one I'm going to say is not for me. I just recently read this one in November, so I just recently talked about it, but it deals with abduction, and a large part of the story is this woman being held in captivity, and I just did not enjoy reading about that. The writing was good, it was fine. I wouldn't say that it was a bad book, it just was not for me. The Murders of Madison May, this one I'm gonna put in I read this question mark. This is like this sci-fi thriller that is about jumping between these different universes, and in every universe Madison May keeps getting murdered, and it's like who's doing it, and this journalist is trying to get to the bottom of it, and jumping around the universes chasing this person trying to figure out what's going on, and I cannot remember what ended up happening in that one. Cool concept, didn't really grab me with the execution. The Arrangement by Kirsten Modulin, this one I would say was fun times. It's just a fun, fast domestic thriller. It's about this couple who wants to spice up their marriage, so they decide they're gonna start seeing other people, but they're not allowed to tell each other about it, and then things take quite a wrong turn along the way. The Blame Game by Sandy Jones. This one was certainly fun times when I read it, but if you asked me to tell you anything about it at this point, I could not. So I'm gonna put it in I read this. I remember the setup of it generally. It has something to do with a therapist who gets too involved with her clients, and she's like helping this guy out who is in a abusive relationship, but there's some kind of big twist. Can't remember what it is, can't remember what happens in the story, but it was fun when I read it. I just read it all, I think in like one day in the summer. So if you're looking for a beach book or a pool book or something, I think it was fun, but it wasn't anything that I can really remember. The Book of Cold Cases, that one was fun time. I really like Simone St. James' atmosphere, settings, plot, vibes, characters. They're just never standouts for me, but she always does a good job with her stories. The Burning Girls, this is an all-time favorite for me. I really love this. It was the first book I read in 2022 and it ended up being a 5-star, and it is one of my all-time favorite thrillers. This was the first book I read from CJ Tudor, which inspired me to go back and read the rest of CJ Tudor's backlist, so you'll see some more of those come through in a little bit. But I'm really glad I discovered her as an author this year because it was really great. This one is about this vicar who's moving to this small town, and there's just a lot of creepy vibes going on. The town's got creepy history, there are secrets, there's things they don't talk about. The last vicar of this parish hung himself in the church. The new vicar is coming into the situation, and the new vicar also has all these secrets from their past they're running away from, and it's all like colliding at once, and I just thought it was a lot of fun. The Chalk Man, however, I did not enjoy quite as much from CJ Tudor. I would just call this one fun times. This was CJ Tudor's debut novel, and it just feels a little bit like Stephen King in a way that isn't my absolute favorite thing. I thought it was fine, but just not a favorite of mine. The Enigma of Room 622, this was a DNF. It was an arc that I got access to that I started. Thought it was gonna be way cooler than it was. It was really confusing. It's a really long story, and so I didn't really want to spend 500, 600 pages on a book that I wasn't hooked by. And then I looked at reviews and they also weren't super great, so I just never ended up picking that one back up. The Family Game, I feel like there's not a good category for this one in this spread for me, honestly. A lot of people are really enjoying it, so I could call it fun times. I thought it was fine, but I just didn't fully love it, but I didn't dislike it. I just don't have a lot of super great things to say about it, but I don't have negative things to say about it either. It's just like super fine, and there's not a category for super fine. So I'm just gonna call it fun times because it was all right. A lot of people are loving it. It was fine, it was fun. Next we have The Golden Couple, and I remember the setup of this one and being intrigued, but then being a little bit disappointed in how the second half of the book goes and how it ends. But if I just think back on it, I think back of it as fun times. If you would have asked me as soon as I read it, I'm sure I probably gave it like a 2-star, but just thinking back on it, if you're just looking for a domestic thriller, then I don't know, it's fine. It's a fun time. The Hiding Place by CJ Tudor, this one I don't remember a ton because I read it right after The Chalk Man and they feel really similar, so I feel like I honestly have to say I read this ? I ended up giving it like 3 stars, 3.5 stars or something. Like, I don't dislike the book, but I don't remember much about it. I think it has something to do with a mine. I think that's the one that has this like creepy mine in the town, but it was just so similar to The Chalk Place that it didn't do a lot for me. The House Across the Lake was interesting. This one I would also say I should have just made a category called like absolutely fine right in the middle. I feel like this one is fine, whatever. It's kind of silly and kind of dumb, but I don't know. It's Riley Sager, you know? It's just, you love him, you hate him, his books are fine, you still keep reading him anyway. The Housemaid, this one I'm definitely gonna say is an all-time favorite just because it surprised me so much. I had so much fun with it. It's a very simple thriller. It's nothing outstanding or mind-blowing or nothing that hasn't been done before, but I just thought it was so tightly executed. I was so in it when I was reading it. I was so involved. I could not put the book down. I wanted to know how it was going to end, and it was just action-packed towards the end. I had a really good time with that. Also, The Island by Adrian McKinty is another all-time favorite. I have a vlog where I read this one as well, and I raved about it in that vlog. I had so much fun with it. It felt like the thriller of the summer for me. It's a survival thriller where this family gets stuck on an island, and oh my goodness, it was so much fun. The It Girl by Ruth Ware. I feel like this one, I have to say, is, I guess, not for me. It was just really boring. It was just so boring. And I like Ruth Ware's books. I'm not a Ruth Ware hater. I really wanted to like this, but I was just really bored by it. So it's gonna have to just be in and not for me. The Last Housewife is also going to be and not for me. I just didn't like it that much, and I think that's okay. I vlogged this one as well when I read it, so I have a lot of discussion around how I felt about it and why I personally didn't like it, and I don't feel a need to defend myself for that. I just didn't really like it. It just wasn't really for me. The Last Time I Lied, this one I'm putting in I read this ? This was the last book I had to finish to read all of Riley Sager's books. This was his second one he published, and it's set at this camp, and I actually remember things about it, and I remember the ending now that I think about it, but It's just not a book that's going to come to mind. If you're asking me for thriller recommendations, if you're asking me for Riley Sager recommendations, it's not going to come to mind. It just doesn't really stand out for me in my memory. Next we have The Latecomer, which was a DNF. This I had as an ARC and it was really dense and I wasn't in the mood to read something really dense at the time, and it hadn't come out yet, so I didn't have an audiobook, which sometimes helped me kickstart my way into a more dense book. So that one's a DNF for now, but I'm probably going to pick it back up at some point. Then we have The Lies I Tell, which I just recently read, and that was fun times when I read it. I will not remember details about that book for very long. I will forget it pretty soon, actually. But while I was reading it, it was fun. It kept me turning the pages. It's like a cat and mouse type game. You know, those are fun. You want to see how it plays out. So it was good. It was fine. The Lioness was a DNF. I read half of it and just wasn't really into it enough. This is more of a literary fiction book that has thriller elements or suspense elements to it. It's not like a super fast-paced, action-packed thriller. It's a survival story. It's set back in the 50s or 60s, and you're following these famous people who are in Africa on this vacation, and then they get kidnapped and they've got to try to survive. There's a ton of different perspectives in it, and it was just not compelling me to keep reading, so I just sat it down. Next we have The Long Weekend, which started off pretty strong for me, but didn't really like it by the end, but also don't really remember it too much, so I'm gonna put it in I read this question mark because I don't really remember a lot of details about it. I just like the setup and the atmosphere of it because it's about these couples who are going on this long vacation together, and the women end up going the night before because the men can't all come on the first night. And so when the women get there, they see a note that says one of their husbands is going to be murdered, and they don't know if that's true or if it's just one of their friends messing with them, but then things turn dark. But I don't really remember a lot about the ending of it, and I remember feeling quite disappointed as the story continued to go on. So that one's just kind of in that weird, I kind of forgot about it space for me. The New Neighbor by Carter Wilson, I really enjoyed this one, although I don't think it's an all-time favorite. I think it's just fun times. It's about this family who moves to this new area and someone's leaving them notes. It's kind of like the TV show The Watcher on Netflix, if you've seen that. I thought it was good. It was really compelling. It was fun, but it's not something that's unique or comes to mind as like an all-time favorite for me. It was just something I had a lot of fun with and that I don't really hear people talk about, so it was kind of like a fun surprise to find something and enjoy something from an author that I had never heard of before. I definitely am going to read more from Carter Wilson, but yeah, I don't know. This just isn't like an all-time favorite for me. Then we have The Other People by CJ Tudor. This one I would also say is fun times, just another fun one from CJ Tudor. This one has a really interesting concept that it ends up exploring, so it's like unique in that way, but not an all-time favorite for me. The Overnight Guest, I did not really enjoy this one, and this is a nope, not for me. I thought it was going to be a lot more atmospheric and present day, stuck in this snowy cabin, seeing someone out in the snow. Oh my goodness, who is it? What's gonna happen? But it ends up taking a lot of time in the past as well, because it like jumps in different timelines and this whole different story that's going on that ends up connecting, of course, but I just didn't really love what the book did, so not for me. The Perfect Family, this one was fun times. It's about this family who's getting blackmailed and they don't know who's doing it, if it's harmless pranks or if it's someone really blackmailing them for their secrets, and it was just another fun, domestic, fast-paced thriller. The Perfect Marriage by Geneva Rose. I feel like I'm gonna have to put this one in I read this question mark because I honestly always forget that I read this. I read this one by listening to the audiobook when I was moving this summer, I think is when I did it, and I ended up not even finishing the last like 45 minutes of it because I listened to the entire audiobook on my drive and then I got here, and so I never ended up finishing the last 45 minutes because I got in, it was late at night, I was moving, and then you know how things go and you just kind of forget about it. But I did look up the spoilers for what happened. I felt like it was kind of predictable, kind of basic. It was one of those books that blew up on TikTok and got really popular there, but I found it just kind of fun. You know, it didn't really blow me away. I feel like people could probably say the same thing about The Housemaid by Frida McFadden though, but that one I just really did enjoy, and I think the writing was better, and I don't know, I just like that one better. But those were both kind of like these big TikTok hyped up books, but one worked for me and one did not, and The Perfect Marriage did not. The Prisoner by B.A. Paris, this one is fun times. I just recently read this one, and so far I feel pretty similarly about all of B.A. Paris's books. They're all just pretty fun in the moment, but not incredibly memorable for a long time, so usually ends up falling in this category. They Never Learn, I thought this one was also fine. I know a lot of people love it, but the big twist that everyone talks about with it was like super apparent to me as soon as I started reading the book. So it didn't really read like a twisty thriller to me. It read more like a suspense where I was in on what was going on and I was just waiting for things to be revealed, which was still fine. I thought it was well written. I thought the concept was interesting. I liked the characters. I liked the atmosphere, but it's just not a favorite for me. I just thought it was fun. It was fine. I would read from the author again. This Might Hurt. This one was another cult book and it was pretty boring. So this is gonna be a nope, not for me. And then What Lies Between Us by John Mars. I can't believe I read this year. This feels like it was so long ago, so I'm gonna have to put it in I read this question mark, but I did not end up enjoying that one, and that has made me hesitant to pick up more from John Mars, but I also don't really remember a lot about it. It's something about like these two women who live together and you're getting both their perspectives, kind of cat and mouse a little bit in that way, and trying to learn about their secrets they're hiding from each other and figure out what's going on in the house. I just didn't really love some things about how the women were portrayed or something, or like the conversations that John Mars was writing about. I remember not really fully loving, but I don't even remember the details of it, so that's why it's in this category of like, I read this? Huh, what a surprise to me. I didn't even realize that. So yeah, this is it for ranking all of my thrillers that I read this year. I ended up with 5 new favorite thriller books this year, which is fun. Lots of fun times. Couple books that I forgot about, and really not that many that I did not enjoy or ended up DNFing. The majority of the thrillers I picked up, I was enjoying. They were fun times, or they ended up being an all-time favorite. So that is really encouraging to see. I really thought and I felt in my heart that it was a good reading year, but it's kind of hard to look back at a full year, quantify if it was a good reading year or not. And I feel like this is a pretty good display. Thriller is like one of my biggest genres. I'm also going to be doing a video like this for all the horror books I read, which I actually think I ended up reading more horror books this year than thrillers, which I think is like the first time that's ever happened. But if this is one of my main genres I read and most of the books ended up in a positive category, then I think that's a pretty good sign that I had a pretty good reading year. So yay, how fun. Let me know down in the comments below as you're watching if there's anything you were surprised by, anything you feel really differently about, like something that's in my all-time favorites that you didn't like, or something that I didn't like that's an all-time favorite for you. Let me know. We can chat about it all down below. And like I said, I'm gonna be doing this for horror books as well, so be sure to look out for that. Make sure you're subscribed, hit that notification bell so you can be notified when I'm posting. I'm doing so much content in December, so there's a lot more to come, and that is a great way to make sure that you don't miss any of it. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.